who in history is looked up to as a hero, but is actually a terrible person. Stan Lee, he's a god here at Reddit, but he was a nasty man. He plagiarized, took credit for the work of others. He tended to be misogynistic, and more. There are many. This is one that online articles love to write about, but the reality is that Stan was just old school, not sadistic. This is an opinion on my part, after having read through several hours worth of material on his history, start to finish, and having briefly met him. If you take a look at his history on those articles, they are mainly quoted by the people who worked with or understand. The reality is that he took every opportunity to praise how amazing the artists and other people who worked on comics were, and is often quoted as holding them in higher regard than himself publicly. This holds true from when I met him. He was full of nothing but praise, which is all his cohorts ever wanted. The main contention that gets brought up in that entire debate against Stan is that he wanted his name on comics that he had very limited or nearly no input on. What gets glossed over is that Stan was a publisher. It's old school, but like movies, his name being on things was like having a main list actor on the poster for a movie. It drew more people in. It had nothing to do with credit for Stan, which is supported by the fact that when asked, he would straight up tell people how limited his involvement was. Anyway, little rant. Stan was not a perfect man, nor is any man, and I guess he was a bit of a hard boss, but he does not deserve these specific criticisms, in my opinion. To me, it's the same as other actors getting upset when Matt Damon is in big letters on the front of a movie they are also credited on, but Matt's name is on top, because of course it would be. That's advertising for you. Dr. Seuss, he straight up cheated on his wife for a few years, while she had cancer, and then when the wife finally killed herself, he married the mistress almost straight away. Edit, thanks for my first gold. OP, you legend. Found this suicide note while looking into why she had committed suicide. It's pretty sad. Dear Ted, what has happened to us? I don't know. I feel myself in a spiral, going down, into a black hole, from which there is no escape, no brightness, and loud in my ears. From every side I hear, failure, failure, failure. I love you so much. I am too old and enmeshed in everything you do, and are, that I cannot conceive of life without you. My going will leave quite a room, but you can say I was overworked and overwrought. Your reputation with your friends and fans will not be harmed. Sometimes I think of the fun we had, all through the years. Although a great boxer and a fine showman, I have a lot of problems with things Muhammad Ali said when he was younger. That interracial couples should be murdered, that sort of thing. A black man should be killed if he's messing with a white woman, he said. And it was the same for a white man making a pass at a black woman. We'll kill anybody who tries to mess around with our women. But suppose the black woman wanted to be with the white man, the interviewer asked. Then, she dies. Ali answered, kill her too. No, I'm not kidding. Google the exact quotes, they're brutal. He did soften up and change his mind. The Nation of Islam, which he was part of at the time, is basically racist Scientology with a tenuous connection to real Islam. He later converted to Islam and didn't really hold such views till Muhammad Ali was a racial purist. Thomas Jefferson sucked so hard, even when graded on a curve for the standards of his own time, or when compared to George Washington, Ben Franklin, John Adams etc. He got Sally Hemings pregnant when she was 14. He was born incredibly wealthy, and ran his estate into the ground with extravagant spending and neglect, and left all of his kids, even the white ones, broke. Almost everything and everyone he owned got sold to pay his debts when he died. People remember him for the nice sounding things he wrote about human rights, but he was a massive hypocrite, and he didn't remotely live up to any of them. To me, it somehow makes it even worse that he could write those things and still be such a piece of shit, because you can't argue he didn't know any better. And the story about the way he treated African American scientist Benjamin Banneker is just gross. In short, fuck that guy. I lived in Charlottesville, where Monticello is, for almost 20 years, and the more I learned about him, the more I hated him. Don't forget that he refused to free the children he had with Sally, except in his will. They were his flesh and blood, sons and daughter, and he kept them as property until he died. Like, that's cold as fuck. Mother Teresa, even though she's synonymous with charity, she actually put lots of suffering people through hell on earth. Doctors took to calling her locations homes for the dying. She'd force people in third worlds, dying of tuberculosis and other horrific diseases, to convert to Christianity. People were subjected to filthy, unwashed medical equipment, being operated by the untrained and uneducated volunteers. Needles were washed in the sink, and then reused. Pain medication was almost never in stock, or given for that matter. Modern equipment was turned away, in favor of prayer. The little medication that was on hand would be far expired when finally, if ever, used. Worst of all, she loved all of the suffering she created. There is something beautiful in seeing the poor accept their lot to suffer it. Like Christ's passion, Mother Teresa said, the world gains much from their suffering. Steve Jobs, terrible father to his kids, and clearly favored his son over his 3 daughters, had to be separated from the rest of the workforce at Atari, because he reportedly didn't shower. Edit, okay, I get it. Being a shitty father, and not showering, doesn't make you a bad guy apparently. Please see you nothing point comment in this thread. And parked on disabled spots, wherever he wanted, because he changed his Mercedes every 6 months, and this way, he could not use a license plate, hence not being given a ticket. And he was against giving to charity, fired people without reason, just because they had a different opinion than him, only acknowledged the first daughter, after she graduated, hid part of the bonus that Atari had given, because of the game that Wozniak developed, Breakout, only mentioned to us 1 year after, and more. The not showering thing was because he was such a pompous ass that he believed his stupid hippie diet made him literally not have body odor, or something very similar to that. At the very least, Jobs was such a massive douchebag on every level. How people can worship him is beyond me. Gandhi. Throughout much of his adult life, Gandhi kept plenty of young female companions close to him, and allowed these relationships to take several different dark turns. For starters, he often kept pairs of girls as his daily companions to address his needs, right down to basic movement, with Gandhi referring to them, according to Adams, as his walking sticks. Moreover, Gandhi made things uncomfortably personal in both, routinely bailing with these girls, and habitually starting the day by asking them if they'd had a good bowel movement. What's worse, even if we can believe that these teenage girls had the ability to consent to any of this, it's not clear that there was any consent in the first place. According to Adams, Gandhi first met one of his most famous companions, Sushila Nair, when she was just 6, and was brought to him by her mother. There, with the girl on his lap, Gandhi asked her mother to gift her to him. Nair didn't become his just then, but did return as a teenager, and became Gandhi's close companion. Major role in partition of India. Ronald Reagan. People love his story, but he set California back for decades from his time as governor. Also, the war on drugs didn't solve anything, but created a new set of issues. Reaganomics too. About half the country thinks he is a literal god, and the other half despise him, with every fiber of their being. Iran-Contra, ignoring AIDS, refusing to leave office, when he became mentally unable to do the job, and his treatment of union strikers, just to add a couple more. Nobody's even mentioned that Reagan turned down an offer for complete denuclearization from Gorbachev because he wanted to play Star Wars, and now the leak racist tapes. John Wayne, I believe in white supremacy, he said, and spoke harshly about African Americans, saying, we can't all of a sudden get down on our knees and turn everything over to the leadership of the blacks. I don't believe in giving authority and positions of leadership and judgment to irresponsible people, he said. Our so-called stealing of this country from them, American Indians, was just a matter of survival. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. Would you say that the wonderful love of those two men in Midnight Cowboy, a story about two fact qualifies? Said Wayne, using a homophobic slur. But don't get me wrong, as far as a man and a woman is concerned, I'm awfully happy. There's a thing called sex. It's an extra something God gave us. I see no reason why it shouldn't be in pictures. Healthy, lusty sex is wonderful. You left out, he got a deferment from serving during World War II, because he was a still relatively unknown actor, and wanted to build his career, yet played a badass serviceman in his movies. Meanwhile, more famous celebrities of the day, like Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable, joined up and served in combat missions. John Wayne was basically his generation's Ted Nugent. Winston Churchill, hero of World War II, right? One of the most celebrated leaders in British history. Guy was also a racist, genocidal warmonger. In Afghanistan, he said, all who resist will be killed without quarter because the Pashtuns need to recognize the superiority of race. And we proceeded systematically, village by village, and we destroyed the houses, filled up the wells, blew down the towers, cut down the great shady trees, burned the crops, and broke the reservoirs in punitive devastation. In Greece, the British Army under the guidance of Churchill perpetrated a massacre on the streets of Athens in the month of December, 1944. 28 protesters were shot dead, a further 128 injured. The British demanded that all guerrilla groups should disarm on the 2nd of December 1944. The following day, 200,000 people took to the streets, and this is when the British Army, under Churchill's orders, turned their guns on the people. Churchill regarded ELAS, Greek People's Liberation Army, and EAM, National Liberation Front, as miserable banditti. These were the very people who ran the Nazis out. His actions in the month of December were purely out of his hatred and paranoia for communism. The British backed the right-wing government in Greece, returned from exile after the very same partisans of the resistance that Churchill ordered the murder of had driven out the Nazi occupiers. In India, Churchill's hatred for Indians led to 4 million starving to death during the Bengal famine of 1943. I hate Indians. They are a beastly people, with a beastly religion, he would say. Bengal had a better than normal harvest during the British enforced famine. The British Army took millions of tons of rice from starving people to ship to the Middle East, where it wasn't even needed. When the starving people of Bengal asked for food, Churchill said, the famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits. The Viceroy of India said Churchill's attitude towards India and the famine is negligent, hostile and contemptuous. He destabilized Iran, Iraq, Kenya, and Palestine to further economic interests. In Ireland, the Black and Tan Force were the brainchild of Churchill. They systematically terrorized the Irish people, committing atrocities like the Bloody Sunday Massacre. He was also an early advocate for the partitioning of Ireland. In Saudi Arabia, he kowtowed to the Wahhabi Sword family. In South Africa, the British ran concentration camps. During the Boer War, he tried to disenfranchise non-white South Africans of his own people. He said, 100,000 degenerate Britons should be forcibly sterilized. Others put in labor camps to halt decline of British race. He also went on to suggest that, for tramps and wastrels, There ought to be proper labor colonies, where they could be sent. Churchill suggested the motto, "Keep England white," when debating the adoption of new laws, limiting immigration from the Caribbean. And then there was that comment, about murdering the infant, Bolshevism, while it is in the cradle, as the British funded the whites in the Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1922. Yes, the same Bolsheviks, who won World War II, defeating Hitler. Long story short, Churchill was a war criminal. I think enough people like Robert E. Lee to qualify him as being looked up to as a hero, but he was a notably horrible slave owner. He violated years of his family's slaveholding tradition of keeping families together by selling off members and causing untold emotional pain, and would also order brine poured into the wounds of escaped slaves who were recaptured and whipped. Confederate soldiers, under his command, routinely committed war crimes, mostly against black Union troops, and during invasions of northern land, they would capture free blacks and force them into slavery. After the Civil War, he became the president of Washington College, now Washington, and Lee, laugh out loud, he was completely indifferent to 2 incidents of attempted lynchings on campus, and made no attempts to punish the perpetrators. He also, despite the popular mythology of the lost cause, made 0 attempts to reconcile North and South in any meaningful way, and in fact, it was implied that further violence could be possible if the post-war South was not given its way on basically everything. There was also, the big kahuna of leading of traitors in defense of slavery, in a war that ultimately killed 2% of the country, but he was a real, fucking piece of shit, in his own personal and professional life too. With that out of the way, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want more content to keep appearing in your subscription box. Thanks for watching, and until next time.